local aid for net school spending, we sent over a figure of $163 million for this year. That was an increase of just under $3 million. It was essentially designed to be a pass-through of the increase in Chapter 70 local aid from the state, which, although reported at $5 million, was actually $3.9 million, because we just had a conversation about school choice. School choice cuts both ways. We have students from Brockton that go out to charter schools or other school systems, and we're charged back for those students. Last year, in FY15 last year, we were charged back a total of $4 million against our Chapter 70 aid to cover the cost of students going to school outside of the district. And that's money we never received. They take it right off the top. This year, that figure went up to $5.1 million, an additional deduction of $1.1 million. So the theoretical $5 million that was reported in additional Chapter 70 was not $5 million, because the deduction went up by 1.1, so it was really 3.9. And then from that, there were additional expenses, Schedule 19 expenses, primarily for health insurance increases, that took another $800,000 out of that. So the true net figure of increase in Chapter 70 aid coming to the city this year from the state, give or take a few dollars, was about $3.1 million. You good with that, Aldo?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So at that point, we're essentially trying to make sure we pass through the net increase while we continue to look for additional funds. And I made the commitment to the committee that, you know, our goal was to try to get as close to $165 million as we could, but we had a lot of work to do. Last Wednesday, faced with the prospect of what would have been, in my opinion, catastrophic layoffs, I agreed to commit an additional $1.5 million for net school spending to the school budget, although we didn't actually have the money in hand yet. I've got to tell you that on the city side, because I have to look at the entire picture, before sending that additional $1.5 million last Wednesday, we're faced with a $4.2 million deficit in the city budget. I think everyone knows we had a lot of snow last year, historic snowfall. And even though we budgeted a reasonable amount of $2.2 million for snow removal, we spent $4.7 million. I mean, it was unprecedented. 4 major storms in less than 3 weeks with no melt at all in between any of the storms. And we continue to lobby and look for federal aid that, you know, we think eventually we'll get about $700,000. Barely makes a dent in the almost $5 million bill for snow removal. So in any event, sending the $1.5 million last Wednesday allowed the number of RIF notices to be less than they would have been otherwise, and I understand it's still a very large number that will have an impact. I'm just saying it would have been a lot worse without the additional $1.5 million. That did drive the city deficit up to $5.7 million, and that's what we're contending with on the city side. And when I present my budget to the City Council a week from Monday, that budget will have to include a plan as to how we're overcoming that $5.7 million deficit with some combination of increased revenues and painful cuts. So prior to today, our net school spending was at $164.5 million. Our non-net school spending, which is essentially transportation, I had level funded at the roughly $7 million of last year. So that you know, almost every single city department on the city side is level funded, with the exception of police, I think, had an increase. And many departments are getting less. But I did level fund the transportation at $7 million. Earlier this evening, the CFO and I finalized our school, our financing of the school department budget for this year. And I'm pleased to tell you that we are sending an additional $1.1 million to the schools. $572,500 in terms of net school spending, which gets us up just a little over the $165 million, and an additional $600,000 for non-net school spending, because it was apparent to me that there have been increases in the cost of transportation this year. It's still about $1 million less than the school committee was asking for. But without that $600,000, I think that student transportation would have been seriously jeopardized for mainstream traditional students. So at $165 million, we're now up a little over $2 million from the original budget. That puts us now $4.1 million over last year's funding for net school spending. So I just want to emphasize, I have people approach me that feel as though we've cut local aid to the school district, and it's just not the case. It's an increase now of $4.1 million, plus the increase of $600,000 on the non-net side, for a total increase of $4.7 million to schools this year. It's about a 3% increase. It's almost $5 million. I am telling you, it is the absolute best we can do. And I do not anticipate any future increases in that number. I've tried to bring you everything I possibly could tonight so that the school committee would have some time to make some tough decisions to decide how to best serve the needs of the students with the money that we have available. It does not mean that we're not continuing to look for money everywhere we possibly can. Last Wednesday, I was down in Washington. I met with Senator Markey, and the Senator's office is continuing to try to help us lobby for additional funding for the schools for technology under the E-rate program. There's no guarantee other than the fact that we're trying. This week, actually on the same day, we did receive some slight modifications in how FEMA will reimburse the city for snow removal. And where it impacts the schools is FEMA decided that they would now allow money for removing snow off of roofs to be submitted for potentially 75% reimbursement. On the city side, that has very little impact, but on the school side, I know that the superintendent, Mike, and Ken are working very hard on putting those figures together with Aldo, but it's potentially maybe an additional $100,000 or so could come back to the schools. Whatever comes back for that, I will pass through. I also yesterday sent out about 20 letters to nonprofits in the city. And I think, you know, it's no secret that I've asked nonprofits for some help in the past. We have not received any new help other than from a couple of nonprofits that gave to us in the past. We have some major nonprofit organizations in the city that really put a significant drain on city resources around public safety, police, and fire, which are the other two of the big three budgets that we have here in the city, along with schools. And back in January, I sent out requests to the nonprofits asking them to make a voluntary payment to the city of 10% of what their property tax bill would have been had they been subject to tax. The original ask is for 30% because we spend a little over 1/3 of our city budget on police and fire. And those are services that are directly drawn upon by all of these nonprofit associations. And I'm not talking about houses of worship. I'm not talking about small volunteer organizations. I'm talking about, in most cases, multi-million-dollar organizations that have CEOs making six-figure incomes, like High Point, like Brockton Hospital, like the YMCA, like the Neighborhood Health Center, like BAMSI. I mean, I think we do have organizations in the city that could help us. And of that 30% ask, we only asked for 1/3 of that this year, with the idea that we would phase in the voluntary ask over 3 years. To give you an example, the Good Samaritan Hospital, now owned by Steward Healthcare, pays about $2.3 million in property taxes. The Brockton Hospital, as a nonprofit, pays $0. I will tell you that we deploy police and fire resources to that facility on almost a daily basis. High Point And people know I certainly am an advocate for treatment and believe in everything High Point does. But this past year, on their campus consists of 2 parcels of property that they were leasing. So the owner of the property was paying property taxes. During this past year, High Point purchased one of those parcels from the owner. That piece of property last year paid $75,000 in property taxes to the city. This year, it pays 0. So High Point, through its rent, was paying $75,000 on that parcel last year. This year, they paid 0. You know, we could call back 2 teachers with that money that we lost. So I sent out letters to those organizations yesterday, renewing my request for assistance, outlining to them the difficult budget circumstances we find ourselves under, and pledging that any voluntary payments that they make for this fiscal year will be passed through 100% to the school budget to help us recall laid-off school personnel. So any help you can give me in convincing some of those organizations to step up and help us during this crisis, whatever they agree to voluntarily pay us, I will pass through to the school budget, every single penny of it. So I'm trying. And I can't help but remind folks that, you know, earlier this year, I settled a long-standing lawsuit for the development of an electric power plant. If that plant were in operation this year, it would pay a guaranteed $4 million to the city. There would not be a budget cut. I could find the other $1 million in savings, and there would not have been one single layoff. So I would also ask you to ask your city councilors to withdraw their obstruction of that settlement in federal court and allow us to move forward with the development of that plant that is coming anyhow, but the longer we delay it, the more money we're losing. Settlement, there's an immediate lump sum payment to the city of $2.85 million the day the shovel breaks the ground. And I've pledged $1 million of that $2.85 to the schools. $1 million for public safety, $1 million for schools, and $850,000 for parks and recreation. So we are looking to get every potential source of revenue we can, and it's clear that with the state continuing to underfund the needs of an urban gateway city like Brockton, who takes on the most challenged students we have in the state and the most expensive students to educate, and we take the challenge on willingly, and we embrace it. But you know, about 1/3 of our students are still learning to be proficient in English. 80% of our students live below the poverty level. And we have a significant number of students who receive special ed services from what I believe to be the best special ed department in the state. But it's all very expensive. And as much as the affluent suburbs want to complain that they don't think they're getting their fair share, they don't take on the challenge that we take on. And the funding we're getting from the state is insufficient. But in the meantime, all I can do is try to find additional sources of revenue and do the best I can to get money over to you. So there's a little more money. I know you have tough decisions to make, but I know that having sat in your seat for 4 years and done 4 school budgets myself, I know that you'll allocate it where you feel it'll do the best good.